What if I speak here?
Yeah, we can hear you there in the microphone.
Okay, now is that better? Can you hear me now, Aaron?
Yeah, that's much
Yeah?
better.
Okay, cool. Buongiorno, everybody. We're just waiting for a few others. Sam, Mo, Sam. Yeah. So I have to write so tired. Yes. Hi. Do you need one of the thumb drives? You're good? Yeah. Okay. I know I didn't get to meet you, but I lost you all at dinner, so. Hey. Oh. Whoops.
Wait a minute. Chris, this is ours, right? It's to the ear both.
Yeah.
This is what I'm supposed to be. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that we were doing hybrid. What? I didn't know we were doing hybrid. I need to get Rama's stuff up. Oh, it is? And then I have a PowerPoint, and I'm on a Mac. Is it possible?
And then you save mine on there too?
I don't think I have my adapter. Is it possible?
On the desktop?
On your computer?
Okay.
Like I can keynote too or whatever. Couldn't find my adapter this morning. Probably in Canada.
Do you think there's water around?
Like a bottle or to refill a bottle? Yeah, take your time. You're like the third presenter, so if you're late, go get your water. I'd go to one of the restaurants, see if they've got anything. Actually, the woman downstairs was there, like the woman who's organizing. She probably know. How are you doing today, Tiffany?
All right.
Ready for 2 back-to-back presentations?
Yeah, I only got like an hour's sleep.
On sort of the same thing, or are you doing 2 different things in education? I thought that you were presenting here on the global knowledge thing. So it's like a different.
Well, it's just like dialogue circles. So
You're
it's
just
not
doing so
really.
many cool things that, like Chris, I can't keep track.
They're
of all the
kind
cool
of
things.
related.
Okay. Well, I'm excited to come to your session. I thought yours was at 8:30.
Aaron, can you hear us talking?
I was like, oh, I'm gonna miss Tiffany's because I'm not getting up at 8:30. I'm like, oh, never mind, mine's at
Yeah,
8:30.
he thought it was backwards too.
Yep. Oh, that's okay. It got me up here. It was the first time I've actually been here by 8:30 and seeing like the fog in the morning.
yeah.
I think I'm actually still jet lagged. I'm just not admitting it to myself. And I've survived by sleeping in a little bit every day.
It's hard to sleep.
Still can't believe you guys are all in the same room. That's so
You
funny.
should see Bashoot. He's got this pillow just like over his head. I'm not even. Yeah.
That is wild. Like I was gonna try staying in a hostel because I missed all the hotels. And my husband was like, "You're too old for that shit. Like, find something." I'm like, "Okay."
And yeah, thank you for everything we say. Just so you know. Morning, buongiorno.
Are you also connected up there? Who needs the PowerPoint? Maybe I'll ask them who I can set.
Well, so there's this if you want to use this and just, we've been saving it onto that.
Oh, is that the main computer?
Mhm.
Okay, yes, that would be great.
Okay, so I don't think I use that for anything, so.
Oh, but I don't have an adapter.
Oh,
So I'm gonna have to email it. Can I email it to you?
yeah.
Okay. Okay. That should be good. Since I had ROSHANI on her way and then realized I'm going first. She was going to. Chris going first.
So that's Erin. I don't know if you know, have you ever met Erin?
Hi, Erin. I think we met in Chicago, maybe.
Probably. Well, no, he was not there.
No, Melbourne online, maybe.
He's in Seattle. Probably on an online session. He helped organize the biennial, so.
Definitely met him. That's what I mean, like that I would have seen him.
Yeah.
Met him at the conference. Did you get it?
Oh, let me check.
I'm sure I have my adapter somewhere, but it's just one of those things that was not allowing me to find it today. I have so many things open. Thank you. And then this is just the like conference computer.
Mhm, mhm.
They already told us that they're gonna just turn this on, or do we have to do anything between?
Ooh.
Added with our
Oh.
silly tech people.
I think we're set to go
Yeah,
whenever
like, do they
we're
know
ready.
when to put up the PowerPoints and stuff. Do you have a
Oh, we
PowerPoint?
probably just have to tell them to share screen, right? My stuff's on there. I think ROSHANI put her stuff on there, and we'll just have to click it when we get to it.
I guess it's fine. Okay. All right, Chris, it's probably time to get started. ROSHANI's gonna be back before it's her turn. She's just gonna get some water. but we're at 8:39. You want to use the like overarching? Oh, I can open it on my computer if you want. Yeah, I just thought, you know, this one actually was built together rather than being smashed together. So being able to share a little bit from this paragraph. Give people an idea what's going on. And then do we turn his mic on when it's time? You let me know when you're ready. Oh, there you go.
Hi. Morning, everyone. Thanks for making it to a Saturday morning session after our events last night. So today we've got a bit of a symposium. Oops, not a. Yeah. I just want to see that. Yeah. So today we've got a session that we've put together. I guess it's built out of a series of networks that we've been developing over a number of years, and the sorts of conversations that we've been having about knowledge production. I guess partly it's not only the decolonial turn. There's been discussions about social science, alternative forms of knowledge production, the democratization of knowledge, who gets to produce knowledge and on whose terms and so forth. So we've been having these sorts of conversations across, I guess since Chile, the last international, then SCRA, and then again in Melbourne, where the digital medium became such an important conduit for keeping people connected and so forth. So we've been speaking in that sort of space. So we're coming together here to talk a little bit about the Global Connections project, which NATALIE is leading, which is a podcast project. But we had these discussions and said, well, there's people doing all sorts of interesting and innovative things around blending arts practice, arts informed practice, what is liberation arts, and all sorts of technologies that challenges a little bit about how in the academy we think about what constitutes knowledge. So it moves a little bit about away from talk and text as the basic medium, but also raising some sorts of questions about does other modalities just become the tool for translation, or other modalities actually a central and important part of knowledge construction itself and process for meaning making and so forth. So this session is a little bit about us sharing some of this work, but with a focus on some of the ways in which these, arts-based, arts-informed modalities are central to alternative forms of praxis and knowledge making. So we've got four people who will share some of the work. Natalie is going to talk first on the podcast project, and then I think it's ROSHANI who's going to talk about some of the work that we've been doing over a long period of time in Melbourne in the context of, I guess, it's a sort of a program in the Australian context called Community Arts and Cultural Development. And then it's RAMA who's going to join us via Zoom. Well, he's not actually Zooming, he sent us a video. He should be here, but he's probably watching the football grand final in Australia at the moment. And then it's going to be Tiffany, who's going to talk about some of the work that they have been doing at, and Tiffany and Aaron, who's joined us, about the work that they're doing at National Lewis University. So Natalie, I'll hand over to you. Yep.
Turn the PowerPoint on. And also, good morning, everyone. I'm Natalie. I also almost didn't make it to the session because I thought it was at 10. So this is my first time actually getting here by 8:30. I think I'm still jet lagged. I also just wanted to make a note about accessibility. So feel free to move your body in whatever way you need to, go get water, close your eyes if you need to, whatever you need to kind of get through this space in a meaningful way. And if you need anything from us, if you need us to speak louder, slower, just wave your hand or speak up so that we can make sure we're all kind of here and grounded and able to participate. Our hope is to get through this quickly enough. We have time for conversation and to hear from you. So I will get started. So Chris mentioned that we have proposed and been funded to develop a global connections podcast. And Connections is actually the name of the grant. It's a knowledge mobilization grant out of Canada that usually is used to run conferences. Am I really loud? Am I too close? I feel very loud in my own ears. Maybe I just haven't used a microphone in a decade. So the purpose of the grant is to bring people together and share knowledge that already exists. And so it felt like a really lovely place for us to start some of the work that we want to do. Oh, I lost the mic. Is it better? It's good? Okay. As long as everybody else can hear me, it's fine with me. It was a good place to start the work because we were kind of pushing up against this idea that newness was always better. You know, let's make up new ways of doing things rather than really kind of grounding ourselves in histories and traditions and ways of knowing that already do a lot of really wonderful things in our communities. So that's kind of where we started. And I want to give a nod to the many people that have been a part of this project. So the grant is built across 5 global regions: Canada, Australia, Chile, South Africa, and Indonesia, with other people participating elsewhere. So these are just kind of the formal grantees, but we have had participation from probably another dozen or so countries. With the idea that, you know, actually, before I go too far into it, we also have a really lovely graduate student collective. So the funding has allowed us to hire grad students across 5 different countries to come together to build their own capacities on podcasting. So they've been trained by a professional podcast consultant. We've done kind of group process training, their skill sharing within all of the beautiful things that they already know and do. And I think you all, so ROSHANI is one of the students you'll meet once a month, and there's like networking and care and relationality kind of built into the project so that the output is not only a podcast, but an ongoing global network of emerging scholars from different parts of the world. And, you know, Chris and I talked about this, I think, for a long time before we got money for it. But we really, it kind of grounded it in this idea that many scholarly modes of knowledge mobilization are actually disconnected from the ways that we want to build relationships and solidarities. So conferences, I think, are one thing that represent a similar feeling to what we're trying to do with this podcast: relational connections, conversation, dialogue, and the generative nature of that work, but capturing it in a way kind of like what the ICCP in Melbourne did, where it's held in, it can be held in an archive, right? So the Melbourne conference was all recorded because it was digital. So it was not something that we just came together to do and then it dissipates into the wind. It is something that has some lasting holding power. And that's kind of the goal of this podcast as well, that we want to be able to move knowledges in ways that are accessible to people who are not only going to be reading academic publications or not reading academic publications at all, but also the idea that through creation, we're actually moving that knowledge to a deeper place than we might have if we were constructing it through the written word. And that we want to really think about the flows of knowledge. So, you know, essentially, we were kind of naming that we aren't all talking to each other from the places and processes of our own kind of spaces and contexts. And it was limiting our ability to learn, share, and co-create. The focus was kind of on critical, methodological, practical, theoretical advances in, even though that sounds like newness, things that people were doing in spaces that were really pushing against the boundaries of our discipline or the boundaries of kind of community praxis. And how could we learn and mobilize those knowledges kind of between, though I know we're problematizing kind of global south, global north, but between global south and global south, you know, different communities in the global south, but also thinking about that knowledge kind of moving global south to global north, and not trying to kind of package knowledge in a kind of very Western way and sell it out to other communities, but thinking about the flows and powers of knowledge. So the title of our project
No, però
is...
questo va in un'altra sala. Questo link.
We have a translator. Oh, sorry.
Come?
I hope that means someone's translating me. That would be amazing. Okay, hopefully no problem at all. So the name of the project is Moving Critical Voices to the Forefront, Building Global Solidarities with Community Psych Scholars to Increase Scholarly Impact and Inform Everyday Praxis. And the outcome, so we're trying to bring in all the things that we know, which will still make it an imperfect project, but trying to bring in all the things that we know. So thinking about, multimodality, so voice, oral, storytelling, that level of engagement. Also thinking about kind of language accessibility, also thinking about sensory accessibility. So the podcast itself is being recorded in whatever the first language of the speakers are. So our first podcast by our Chilean team was recorded in Spanish, transcribed, translated. So all of the episodes will be available in every other one, I think, is going to be in English in its original recording.
Poi spegni.
But-
Poi aspetti che si raffredda, non aprire per favore.
No, I wouldn't want to be the one doing the tech, so it's no problem. But they will all also be available in transcripts in English, Spanish, and French. And that is obviously still limiting, but allows us to hopefully move some of these back into the spaces where they are created, but also make them accessible to the majority of community psychology folks and practitioners across the globe. And I just want to, I don't really know how to use a Mac, not a Mac, whatever this is, PC. And it's really about kind of a form of resistance. And there are people at my university and another university in Canada who have been actively trying to think about what it means to reimagine what a scholarly output is. And so we've been really thinking about podcasts specifically as a scholarly output. And I think the way that we have used media in academic spaces has been create something and then write an academic manuscript about it. And the academic manuscript is the
Please, can you mute your microphone? Thank you.
excellent. Thank you. That is okay. I'm kind of loving all of the distractions of being in person and like remembering what it is to be a human. So I've forgotten what I was saying, but that's okay. Oh, scholarly output. And so not to say we are not going to write about this, because we will, but we tried to create the process that made us feel like we could in some way say this was a scholarly output. So the outcome of this is going to be, 12 episodes of a podcast, but 10 of those episodes are actually going to be launched as pairs. So we have 5 content-oriented episodes. So I'll use Marianne, who just walked in, as our example of the first and only one recorded at the moment. That, Marianne kind of generated for us this very beautiful conversation on a concept that they're theorizing in Chile around praxical violence, the violence inherently built into our professional practice in communities. We now are in the process of sharing that transcript and recording with our global network, who will be invited to come in and hold space together and be recorded in our collective response to what Marianne has provided for us. So it will be nearly a kind of collective peer review and a process of saying, this is what this means for us. These are the implications of the content that you are providing to us. These are our potential critiques, the ways that conversation will happen. And then we will launch them as these pairs. There are multiple voices from multiple places reflecting on how and why these pieces of information, these concepts, these theories, or these methods are really useful for us in moving our critical everyday work forward in the communities that we work in. And I think I've gone on a couple of tangents, so I'm going to move through because I'm probably running out of time. But why now? I'll just name the most important one for me, that a lot of us feel really isolated and fragmented in the critical work that we do. And so either that means we're the only community psychologist in our program, in like a broader non-CP program, or it might mean we're the only CP program in a region, or it might mean we're the only critical scholar inside a more kind of mainstream community psych program. And so thinking about what it means to actually forge solidarities across space so that we have a community, we have people who have our back, we have people who are helping us push our own thinking forward. That isolation that happens across kind of geography and context is something that we really wanted to address, that we can't just expect to walk into a conference, stumble upon all of the cool and wonderful people here, and then leave with long-standing relationships. We all trip into a couple of those, thank goodness. I hope we all have a couple of those from our conference lives, but we're trying to be more intentional to make sure that those little pockets of people who have found each other can come together in a more kind of sustained and supported way. And I feel like I've already talked about that. So I'm going to just leave it there, and hopefully we'll have time for questions. But if you are interested in following the podcast, maybe one little fun fact I'll share is yesterday, all of the people who are here with us on this project, so Chris, Marianne, Garth Stevens, Roshani, Sam, because we just invite Sam into everything, and Antonia, so a student who works with Marianne, sat in that big, beautiful park over there, and we recorded some of our podcast. And it was so beautiful to be in the same time zone with people we've been working with for 2 years. And I said, hey, let's just record like some things that make us happy, and we'll have little snippets. And I think we accidentally recorded an entire episode that hopefully we'll be able to share with you at some point. And then for anyone who does go to the North American Conference, SCRA, which will be in Atlanta, Georgia, probably next June, we're going to launch the whole podcast there. So this is an ongoing kind of knowledge project. It will not begin and end with this season of the podcast, but hopefully we're creating a space that helps us nurture this kind of global, collective, critical space for us to think in together.
Good morning, everyone. My name is ROSHANI JAYAWARDANA, and I'm a doctoral candidate from Victoria University in Melbourne, Australia. I would firstly like to begin by acknowledging that I work, study, and live on stolen land of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. And as we share our knowledge practices together, I pay respect to the deep knowledge embedded within the Aboriginal community back home, their long and continuing relationship with the land, and their ownership of country. Today, I'll be sharing some of my research work, which contributes to my doctoral thesis. My research takes place and is situated within the area of Brimbank, which is a municipality in the west of Melbourne, Australia. My study involves embedding myself in the space of my research to understand how settings are constructed to become safe, empowering realms for young people in the area of Brimbank, and how particular participatory vehicles such as radio can enable processes of resistance, counter-storytelling, and empowerment for them. So the local government area of Brimbank, located in Melbourne, Australia, is characterised by a high number of migrants and refugees. It's known as an area that is considered to have low health and wealth, and is often perceived as a hotspot for youth disengagement, gang-related crime, and youth unemployment. Young people in this area are often subjected to dominant narratives that circulate within public discourse and mainstream media about who they are and what their lives are like. These narratives are generally constructed by those outside of the youth experience, incorporating very little about the complexities of young people, and often painting them through a deficit and troublesome lens, particularly in light of their race. So my project is done in partnership with Brimbank Neighbourhood Houses, which represents a body that governs a range of community spaces in the area and aims to respond to the needs of community through its programs and its facilities. My work takes place in Sydenham Neighbourhood House, which is one of the Brimbank Neighbourhood House locations that specifically aims to cater to young people. However, in spite of this, Sydenham Neighbourhood House is ironically known as a community space where young people often congregate around, but actually do not spend time within. So as I recount and document young people in this research, and young people specifically from the area of Brimbank, I acknowledge my position of belonging to this community. As a young person of colour who was born in Brimbank, who grew up in the area, who still lives in the area, and as a young person who has experienced ambivalence within the Sydenham Neighbourhood House space growing up, I write myself within my work as a member of the group that is a focus. I'll also explain a little later on the ways that this positionality manifests in the program of documentation, which adds another layer to the community engaged orientation of this work. So to begin my research within the place-based location of Sydenham Neighbourhood House, I engaged in conversations with young people who spent time around the area, such as at the nearby train station and shopping centre, to understand how young people were connected to the Sydenham Neighbourhood House space. I sought to understand how they felt within the space and what programs they were involved in if they did engage within it, and why they may refrain from using the space if they didn't. So through these conversations, young people recalled how they were subjected to discrimination and surveilling within the Sydenham neighbourhood house space, which hindered their sense of inclusion and comfortability. They also expressed that whilst race in the context of the space contributed to treatment, unfavourable treatment, as well as violent processes, race was not the only othering factor in these young people's lives. Their characteristics of their age, gender, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic status, as well as race, were constantly used to categorize, homogenize, and stereotype them through their everyday experiences and within settings. These conversations highlight the ways that race is often used to conflate young people based on their racial identities, and how it can also inhibit the understanding of the many experiences and identity positions that may lie beyond race. Through these conversations,
Excuse
young
me?
people also...
Is there, thank you. Now we see the PowerPoint.
Oh, good. Okay, I'll keep going. Through these conversations, young people also spoke about existing programs in the community setting and suggested new ideas and ways of using the Sydenham neighbourhood house space. They reported that programs offered through Sydenham neighbourhood house were not meaningful to them, and programs that were generally offered were based on what adults thought that young people wanted, such as resume writing and career workshops, rather than what young people actually wanted for themselves. In light of this, they proposed initiatives which were creatively and dialogically based, with a specific focus on building their skills and sharing their experiences. Through actively listening and responding to these conversations with young people, the project aimed to focus on how settings could be created and creative tools could be used to propel young people's multifaceted insights and stories. Extending on the physical space of Sydenham neighbourhood house and responding to the digital turn in light of the COVID-19 lockdowns in Melbourne, young people curated a setting where they could platform their identities, highlight their complexities, and nurture their skills through the program of Brimbank Live. Using digital technologies and tools, the Brimbank Live program gave young people the platform and resources to create their own radio shows where they unpacked experiences and issues important to them, as well as engage in sharing their passions and their interests. These radio shows featured on the Brimbank Live radio station, which was positioned as a youth-led radio station produced and presented by young people from the Brimbank Live program. My research documented the process of Brimbank Live following the experiences of the 13 young people involved in the program. These young people were aged between 15 to 26, had diverse characteristics of race, ethnicity, gender, and sexual orientation, and all had a connection to the local government area of Brimbank. In addition to holding similar identity positions to the young people through my race, age, and my connection to the Brimbank community, I also became involved in the process of Brimbank Live as a participant of the program who worked with the young people in curating the radio station and shows. This allowed me to document the Brimbank Live experience, not just as an observer of the program, but as a young person who was a participant of the program, immersing and sharing the practice and experience of doing radio with the young team of Brimbank Live. So to begin the radio process, we firstly engaged in radio training where we learnt the craft of live radio, as well as the skills of hosting and producing content. We also began planning, designing, and creating our radio shows, either individually, in pairs, or in trios. On our shows, we plan to cover a range of genres and topics that were representative of and important to us. This ranged from showcasing stories and conversations about gender identity, racial and cultural diversity, mental health, sport, local music, and community issues. As we planned our radio content, each young person chose to format and design their radio shows in different ways. For example, some young people who were singer-songwriters chose to write songs about particular experiences and topics, which they recorded and platformed on their music-based shows, and others curated radio shows that were dialogue-based and sought to platform conversations between co-hosts or interview guests in relation to their show themes. In addition to creating our shows, we also led decisions regarding the station in terms of how often we were going to broadcast, as well as engaging in the promotion of the station. During this process, semi-structured interviews took place with the individual young people of the Brimbank Live team to explore their experiences of being a young person in their community, to understand what brought the young people into the Brimbank Live program, and to gauge what it was like leading their own radio space. As the station of Brimbank Live officially launched in July of 2020, those focus groups were conducted with the Brimbank Live team to reflect on what we enjoyed about being part of the program, what we gained through the process, and how the Brimbank Live program was going to move forward. Following this discussion, the Brimbank Live team decided to do weekly shows that continued on for a year after the station's launch. So through the radio shows, the Brimbank Live team spoke about a variety of topics which reflected who we were, what we were passionate about, and what we deemed important. We recall the ways in which dominant narratives often paint us through the fixed lens of our race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic status, and how our social and political identities tend to negatively blacklist us in our everyday experiences and spaces. As the team spoke of this, we owned and voiced these stories as our own, as they were not a product of what is constructed about us, but were the stories that we construct about our experiences ourselves. As the radio team spoke about these dominant framings, we also use our radio shows as a space to dismantle these narratives. For example, on one of the Brimbank Live shows, the radio host chose to feature a particular segment called Myth Conceptions, where they discuss the selection of misconceptions and myths that circulate about them as children of immigrants and individuals from racially diverse backgrounds. The show segment is seen in the following excerpt, where the radio host engaged in dialogue about the stereotypes that specifically exist for Black women and the ways in which these framings can lead to violent constraints. This conveys how we as young people are not only aware of these dominant narratives, but how we also use the vehicle of radio to actively and critically call out and disrupt these ways of thinking through our chosen segments and conversations. As we address the ways in which we may be poorly constructed, we also use a radio practice to intentionally engage in topics and dialogue that projected stories of positivity and celebration around our subjectivities. This was seen in shows that were dedicated to platforming topics and conversations about our age, culture, race, and queerness, as well as shows that focus on our interests. These shows existed in light of young people's passions of pursuing music, playing professional sport, as well as set goals of going to university and expanding our capacities. This showed how young people not only spoke of their pursuit for particular goals and pathways within these spaces, but how they actively carved their radio shows to express and build their knowledge within these realms. This relays that instead of solely focusing on how identity positions can be tarnished or hindered, or the ways in which we are othered, young people chose to platform a range of conversations around the navigation of systems, discrimination and violence they experience, as well as stories of their interests and desires to excel and flourish in various fields. Through the vehicle of radio, we carefully constructed content that spoke back to dominant narratives, as well as critiqued and shared how we navigate these constraints in our everyday lives. Scholars such as Magnola and Walsh speak of how being aware of and naming such notions illustrates resistance towards them, and how this resistance is closely linked to the re-existing and the rebuilding of new narratives. This is reflected as stories which spoke back to violent constraints also stood alongside content that spoke to the pride we have in our identities, as well as the passions, knowledge, and interests that we held. By speaking back to conflating and limiting notions about us, as well as speaking about our passions and interests, we organically, as well as intentionally, carve counter stories which forge new understandings of our lives from our own voices. The Brimbank Live process exampled how radio as a tool was molded and constructed to create shows that best suited our individual, creative, and dialogical desires. This reflects the democratizing nature of community radio, as we use the tool to mobilize and shape the ways that we wanted to share knowledge, whether it was through the dialogue and conversations with co-hosts that we aired, music we wrote and broadcasted, or interviews we engaged in. The vehicle of community radio not only enabled storytelling and expression in a pliable manner, but the digital element of broadcasting also gave these stories its wings. The shows were streamed on our radio app and webpage, and according to the broadcasting statistics, our shows reached global and community listeners in countries such as Australia, the United States, and Ghana, reflecting the particular reach that community radio attached to digital platforms can have in disseminating content. The radio shows were also archived in a public and online space after airing, with the content being accessible even after broadcasting had ceased. This demonstrates how community radio has the ability to become a vessel for stories to be dispersed to the community, and how it can also expand and preserve cultural archives about young people's lives. And finally, the practice of radio was liberating in nature as it positioned us as knowers, authors, and governors of our radio practice and space. As we spoke and platformed our experiences and identities, as well as critiqued the world around us, we affirmed that we come into spaces with deep knowledge and understanding, reflecting critical consciousness and the ways that communities have existing knowledge that don't necessarily need to be raised, but more so given the space for this knowledge to actually be platformed. Furthermore, young people's knowledge, stories, and voices being centered as the integral and driving source of the radio shows reflected resistance towards spaces and programs that often hinder youth's input. It also enriched the confidence, belief, and power that we as young people held in our voices and stories, as well as our contributions. In addition to these, the radio practice also gave us the opportunity and space to strengthen our skills, gain job opportunities in spaces of media and public speaking, and be remunerated for the radio work produced. This emphasizes how the outcomes and participatory experiences from the program enabled and enriched young people within as well as beyond the radio process. Whilst acknowledging that such processes are not linear, straightforward, or without its hurdles, this shows how engaging in the practice of community radio can function as a liberating process and how radio can be a tool of praxis that holds potential for authorship and resistance. This research documents the progress of Brim and Clive to show how young people came together using a collaborative and participatory tool to form an intentional and inclusive site of knowledge mobilization that was made for them to speak their truth and harness stories about themselves. Through the participatory process of community radio, the Brim and Clive team were able to platform stories, ideas, and knowledge that challenges the ways that we understand young people, as well as the ways that young people are spoken about and documented in the public sphere. This emphasizes how radio making is a political and liberating activity that can enable young people to exercise their cultural rights, articulate their knowledge and social experiences, and speak openly about their complex subjectivities to reclaim who they are and re-signify their lives.
Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land I'm currently on over on the west coast of Australia, the Whadjuk Noongar, and to the traditional custodians of the land that the project I will share with you today is taking place on, the Woiwurrung and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. And I'd like to pay respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. My name is RAMA AGUNG-IGUSTI, and I was born on Woiwurrung country in Melbourne, Australia, to parents with settler and migrant ancestries from Scotland, Austria, and Bali. I've spent the last few years completing my doctoral research, working alongside a collective of creative artists with Black African heritage, documenting their work.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay. Can you hear the video?
Before we could, now we cannot.
Okay. Okay. Oh.
Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land I'm currently on over on the west coast of Australia, the Whadjuk Noongar, and to the traditional custodians of the land that the project I will share with you today is taking place on, the Woiwurrung and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. And I'd like to pay respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. My name is Rama AGUNG-IGUSTI, and I was born on Woiwurrung country in Melbourne, Australia, to parents with settler and migrant ancestries from Scotland, Austria, and Bali. I've spent the last few years completing my doctoral research, working alongside a collective of creative artists with Black African heritage, documenting their work, the Next in Colour initiative, which sought to create alternative settings for self-determination. These settings were safe and nurturing spaces that provided opportunities and mentoring for young artists from the African diaspora to enter the creative industries, and were also platforms for facilitating critical conversations, intergenerational dialogues, and building solidarities with other communities that experience racialization and its psychosocial, cultural, and political effects. Now, Australia has a long history of racism grounded in settler colonialism and white supremacy that has impacted both the Indigenous peoples whom were dispossessed from the land, but also the non-white migrants who would later make their homes here. This has been evident in many ways, including the lack of representation of people from non-European backgrounds across institutions, organisations, and positions of power. For people from Black African backgrounds, racialisation has also shaped powerful narratives and discourses that have informed public perceptions. For example, reports have shown that 21% of people agree with the statement that African refugees increase crime. Other reports have shown that 77% of African migrants experience discrimination, and that 38% of students from African backgrounds have reported experiencing racial discrimination. And so it's from this context which is a product of the historical systems of white supremacy and racism perpetuated by coloniality, that the collective have sought to create alternative spaces for self-determination that surface counter-narratives and new shared meanings through arts and creative practices. Though I'm not sharing with you today about all of this work, or my PhD research that sought to document it, but instead, I want to share a little bit about what has emerged after, what has evolved from a research relationship that was guided by relationality, an ethic of accompaniment, and a shared desire for epistemic justice. As the collective troubled taken for granted ways of knowing, being and doing in the spaces they created and negotiated forms of institutional power that sought to constrain their work, I, as a researcher in an academic institution, have also needed to trouble my own role in the politics of knowledge production. One example has been in how the collective and I are planning for the knowledge that was produced for the research to be shared and disseminated. So far, it's followed a very usual path. I've now successfully completed a thesis, written some academic papers and book chapters, one of which was collaboratively written with the collective. I've presented at conferences and university seminars, created a report that was shared with a whole range of stakeholders invested in the work the collective had been doing. And these various activities have contributed to the evidence base. They've contributed theoretically to community psychology, and this might be optimistic thinking, they've informed policy. They've given legitimating power, in particular institutional settings, to the voices and the work of the collective. And of course, I received a qualification, and the university was able to show impact and examples of community partnerships. But there is a question to be asked about what values these different outputs and knowledge products hold for the collective and their community. One of the collective members, multidisciplinary artist Ruth Nyadawat-Ruach, had been leading one of the collective's creative projects, the creation of a multi-edition digital zine called The Colouring Book. Now, zines are self-distributed and self-published magazines that draw on collage and visual and text-based creative practices to share personal or political messaging. Practices of zine making are grounded in histories of activism and resistance and are a platform for which powerful counter-stories can be surfaced. Together, Ruth and I decided to use the colouring book as a platform to not only share the knowledge we had created through the research, but to build on it by collaborating with illustrators who would then expand on the work through their creative practice. Now, this project is a work in progress and not yet finished, but I want to share some of our thinking and planning so far. The zine will be in two parts, each part a narrative comic illustrated by a different creative. One part will be themed collective self-determination. The other part will be themed self-love. The zine seeks to imagine what each looks like within utopias reimagined through ancestral and cultural memories and decolonial Black, Brown, and Indigenous futurism. The zine would also include a deconstructed glossary that would act as a decolonized encyclopedia that rewrites and redefines our connections to colonized language and words. We put together the following brief for the contributing creatives that outlines the intention and origins of the project, and I'll just read that out now. The third edition of the Colouring Book Zine is inspired by a project documenting the work of the Next in Colour initiative in creating spaces, practices, and processes towards self-determined futures. The project documented the home places and healing spaces created through the initiative, spaces that were for critical dialogue, healing, fostering relationships, and cultural safety and regeneration. Within these spaces, a reimagining of relationships and ways of working together occurred that were non-hierarchical, that valued lived experience and interconnectedness of community, and centered relationality. Within these spaces and ways of working, solidarities could take shape, and powerful forms of storytelling can emerge, shaping understanding of oneself, one's communities, one's ancestral and cultural histories, and a collective past, present, and future. These are prefigurative spaces, spaces that wish to enact a vision of the future in the present. Nurtured through self-love and collective self-determination, the spaces described above are seeds through which new futures can emerge. The desire for the third edition of the Colouring Book Zine is to reimagine utopia through Black, Brown, and Indigenous futurism and ancestral and cultural memories. It is an unsettling of linear temporality and with it the taken for granted structures and language that places boundaries upon what we dare to imagine. Some prompts for the creatives were, what does self-determination mean and how is it practiced? What does self-determination and self-love look like? What does it feel like? What kinds of home places and healing spaces can we create? How might we radically reimagine relationships and ways of knowing, being, and doing? How do we realize self-love? How do we form identity, create community? What does it look like to ground future world making in ancestral memory? And what gifts do we wish to leave future generations? The knowledge constructed through the zine does not seek to claim a singular understanding or remain static and unchanging, but we hope instead it invites generativity and for folks to imagine their own utopias and ways otherwise. We do not see the zine as a translation of superior academic knowledge into something simplified and easily digestible for the broader community. But instead, we see it as a return to the knowledge creation and theorization that have been happening in the spaces fostered by the collective and that emerged through dialogue and creative practice. It was this knowledge that was then translated into academic mediums, and through this translation in some ways became reduced and constrained. Through creative modalities, knowledge can be readily felt, sensed, embodied, and for some known in deeply profound, complex, and intimate ways. And we hope the zine can bring together multimodally produced knowledge and enrich our collective understandings and capacities for radical imagination. It's not out yet, but keep an eye out and head to this URL where you can visually look at it and read it online. Thank you very much.
All right, everybody get their stretch on. So I'll try to keep this brief. My name is Tiffany Jimenez. I am a professor at National Louis University, and I'm presenting with Erin Baker Cervantes. And I wish Emilia Jurado could be here, but she's not able to make it. So Erin and I will be covering the stuff today. And, you know, I want to start this off in the context of the conversation that's already going, or the dialogue between the presentations, by saying that I think our framing of this is more from this idea that the institution and the degrees that are associated with the institution of higher education as a thing in a society has the potential to uplift a voice, and that getting a doctorate degree in the world has meaning and creates the potential for more powerful communication. So this is work that's being done with an institution in the hopes that we will do that kind of work. So first, I did want to acknowledge that our main campus is located in the Chicago area of Illinois, United States, which places us within the lines of the traditional homelands of many Native American tribes, such as the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sac, Fox, and Potawatomi tribes. Last year, NLU supported and participated in a march to mark the presence of unceded territory in the heart of downtown Chicago. This is just a flyer to show our participation and solidarity with the local folks here. And this was a collaborative action art project. And what we did was, just to give you a sense, we took red sand and drew a red line down Michigan Avenue, where the line is actually for real. So, you know, it was eye-opening for quite a bit of people. So we wrote a letter of support and participated in the day as well. This was through our Civic Engagement Center. But I also want to mention something else here. Not only do we acknowledge the place in which NLU sits, but also the resources used to make today's session possible. So given all the technology we're using, I want to just point out that Zoom is a company that's headquarters are based in San Jose, California. We honor the Ohlone Indigenous peoples that have continued to reside within those homelands. We also acknowledge the people that have been part of the production of the materials that make up the computer behind which we all sit, including coppers, gold, aluminum, and zinc. These materials predominantly come from Southeast Asia, places like Malaysia, Indonesia, and Taiwan. We hope not to forget those who've struggled in these places at the cost of capitalism and globalization. So just to give an image here of where National Louis University is situated, the map shows you sort of our relationship with the red line of sand that we were advocating for with the tribes of the area. That line that we sit on was really the line where the red line was placed. A couple of pictures here just to kind of demonstrate how NLU is a minority and Hispanic serving institution, indicating that we serve a proportionately high percentage of Black and Brown communities from the area and beyond the area now. We're also a private nonprofit organization that institutes values of justice and innovation. And while there's no escaping the confines of an institution that is part of a capitalistic endeavor of increasing the economic social mobility of its graduates, we want to lean further into the values of justice through the scholarship created through the Community Psych PhD program. So given we understand the monetary investment that our students make in their work with us, we believe we have a responsibility to support their authentic voice and assist in creating spaces for them to influence their world. So just to kind of show, well, and I want to give a little backstory on this. So I went into being a faculty member at a higher education institution, not really wanting that job. I think it's important to say that. I was like, I don't know, Judah, you know, like this is not the world for me. I had a terrible doctoral experience and I don't think this is the place. But he was like, I like all the stuff you're saying. Let's do different. Let's try to see if we can change education. And so National Louis has been a great space for that. Actually, they've increasingly been really cool about being open to new ways of doing and being. And so this is our evolving university statement on scholarship. We just put into a report recently to our internal community. And I'll just read it just so you get a sense of it. And I still think it needs work and we're still kind of working together on all of it, but here it is. National Louis University strives to be thought leaders in teaching and learning and disseminating scholarship on emergent practices and technologies that support learners and promote their success. Following our commitment to scholarship and community, we enact this call through the public scholarship.
creating and sharing knowledge through multiple avenues, and continuing to build knowledge as our work is discussed and tested in our internal and external communities. So I've been part of sessions where we've talked about the common good, and I know I was asking about that terminology because we've been using terminology like public good. And I think we've been intentional in the use of this as it relates to this idea of the public sphere. So public scholarship is defined as a scholarly or creative activity that joins serious intellectual endeavor with a commitment to public practice and public consequence. So this could be things like scholarly or creative work jointly planned and carried out by university and community partners. Could be intellectual work that produces a public good, could be artistic, critical, historical work that continues to shape public debate, and could be efforts to expand the place of public scholarship in higher ed, including the development of new initiatives to address associated injustices. And we've stolen a little bit of this from the Civic Engagement Center at Carleton. But the idea here is that we know the degree means something. I mean, there's some controversy about, you know, does a citizen or person in community's voice really matter in the decision making in a particular space? And I think we still want to believe that it does. And so we're working to find ways of clearing pathways for people to have more impact in the issues that they're passionate about, and finding ways of making more connections more deliberately. Sorry. Okay. So what is multimodal meaning making, and how is it related to authentic voice? I mean, this is the key. I think really learning how to support the space of education where somebody's authentic voice can be cultivated. They know they're feeling like they can be themselves. They don't have to put on an act. They can bring all their multiple identities to the table and really see the world through all those lenses. And so in that sense, we need to learn about the literacy practices of our communities and really leaning into how they communicate and the issues that are important to them, the questions that are important to them. And so since communication is inherently multimodal, there's different ways to say things. And this image kind of shows you the visual, oral, linguistic, spatial, gestural. There are different ways that we can enhance the meaning of an intended argument using different modes and increase access to messages. So in this way, you know, when we talk about writing supports at an institution, an academic institution, our conception of writing expands, and we want to bring in sort of creative expression in the earlier stages of their learning so that their authentic voice is carried on throughout the scholarship and learning experience and on beyond into whatever they end up doing after they graduate. So there's a few projects I'm going to show as examples briefly. Oh, it's not moving. There we go. And well, not projects, but three main things I think you can see sort of how we're using multiple modes in our educational space. So the first one is the Village Project. And so the Village Project is an offshoot of racial justice and praxis conferences that we started at National Louis several years ago. Erica could probably speak at length about all of that since she was the main lead on those things. So I encourage you to talk with her more about that. But it was a project that developed as sort of a community of writers. And we had this main question of how has my life been impacted by coloniality, and coloniality in terms of Maldonado Torres' 10 theses. So it was approximately a 5-year project. It started with dialogues into papers, collective papers, to maybe a chapter to a special issue. And the special issue was intentional in the end in terms of multimodality. But the goal was really, in the end, we realized, to radicalize approaches to psychology and embody decoloniality. And using multimodalities, we hope to connect ourselves and communicate our message. And so different stories were integrated in different ways depending on what they were trying to communicate. But the main question was, how does coloniality make us feel? And how are we working to de-link from colonial systems within and around us? but you know, we had a statement in our special issue as the editors that pointed out the role that editors play in the production and dissemination of new knowledge. And you know, it was important to us that this experience nurtured and amplified and did not disfigure the voices of the writers, which further shaped the overall direction of the issue. And I think, you know, that's the idea in general with our whole educational endeavor. So this is just to show some images of sort of what's in this issue. It's a special issue in the Global Journal of Community Psychology Practice. This is just to show the title and the images of the contributors. These are the editors. It's called Coloniality Unplugged, Cosmologies and Terrains of the Dark Matter. We incorporated YouTube videos, story, metaphor, theory, development through papers, poetry, images, and podcasts. And as you can see, the YouTube video here is Serena's. And, you know, we worked with her quite a bit, and it just, in the end, the video was the best means of getting her message out. She was much more comfortable with the oral space of communicating. And actually, if you watch it, it's pretty powerful, actually. So we were like, why are we trying to force this into something it's not supposed to be? And so that's what it became. And bring on another. This is just to show sort of how images communicated our messages in ways that words could not. Gordon Lee and I wrote a paper in the issue, and there were several images that for me, being somebody who seems to lean further into more visual modes of communicating my message, I really found that was the best way to explain myself. So a lot of these images are from the paper. And so you can kind of see how we move from sort of a racial justice lens. The octopus you can barely see here was the collective conversation in the beginning of the project, where we all felt like we were encompassed by an octopus of coloniality, which we found images online. I'm so sorry. Images online that were related to that idea. And then that linked us to other images, and then thinking about how these ideas are manifesting in our organizational settings and how we should delink and disconnect from those forces. Some of my own drawings, some images that resonated well with me, and then thinking about our connection to nature. You know, how can we relate sort of our collective praxis with sort of the natural environment as well. And this is the part where Aaron takes over. I'm hoping he's there somewhere.
I'm still here.
How do we bring you in as a visual? I don't know.
I am not sure that I'm not sure how easily that is to do with another computer sharing the slides, but I think it's fine because those on Zoom can see me.
Okay. All right. Well, there he is for now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So can you, Tiffany, continue advancing the slides though?
Yes.
Excellent. So good morning, everybody. I am Aaron Baker, Cervantes. I am one of the current doctoral students at the community psychology program at National Louis University.
Sorry, hold on a second, Aaron. Can we get the PowerPoint up again?
Perfect. And I'm going to be speaking a little bit on this segment of our session about our cross-cultural communication and global dynamics course for the community psychology PhD program. So just a couple notes on teaching about culture. So this course was developed by Tiffany as well as Mashoud, and a couple of concepts that they really tried to center in their process was these two notes on teaching about culture. So educators are called upon to play a central role in constructing the conditions for a different kind of encounter, an encounter that both opposes ongoing colonization and that seeks to heal the social, cultural, spiritual ravages of colonial history. Additionally, what the educator does in teaching is to make it possible for the students to become themselves. And I think Tiffany alluded a little bit to that earlier, but that was something that those two concepts are really central to the effort that Tiffany and Mashoud put into redesigning and reconceptualizing our cross-cultural communication course. Some details about the course itself and some context around why this was the right time to kind of go down this pathway. In fall 2020, the Community Psych program welcomed their first ever international cohort. I'm part of that cohort as well. It's not just international, but it's allows people from all across the United States as well to that outside the Chicago area to be able to join this program and work alongside each other remotely, virtually. And so it was really important for this class to be redesigned in the context of having those global connections, those global dynamics. Mashoud was a really integral part in helping co-create this, co-design this course. And so Tiffany and Mashoud together were really insightful in kind of providing some clear foundations for this course, in that there was a liberation and decolonial emphasis, kind of making sure that andragogy was really prioritized within the curriculum development, and considering how to conceptualize and activate embodied epistemologies, making sure that the course was centered around relationships and allowing for and promoting an emergent design. The primary text of the course was Mignolo's and Walsh's On Decoloniality, Concepts, Analytics, and Praxis. And it's a pretty interesting text, can be quite dense. And so trying to find a way to dive into these concepts that are more than just the text in talk was, I think, a really great venture for this, or initiative for this type of content, because as you'll see, it allowed myself and my classmates, as well as the guest speakers, to kind of really integrate and consider different ways of being and knowing in ways that were definitely would have been more challenging if we stuck to the more traditional lecturing, reading approach for this course. Two main principles that really just were so significant in this redesign was this concept of an emergent design and the approach of using storytelling to advance the course content and to kind of emphasize the community that we all held with each other. And so in terms of an emergent design, it was an iterative emergent design, whereas each week the presenters, the guest speakers, provided resources and information that the class were able to follow along with and in preparation for the class, during the class, and even some resources after the class. And what was really key to this was that these resources weren't necessarily beholden to any sort of specific modality. So a lot of the different speakers were able to kind of bring in resources of a variety of modality types: art, videos, movies, books included, articles as well, music and poetry. And Tiffany and Mashoud themselves modeled a way to kind of tell a story that explored their narratives, that helped connect to the content of the course, and allowed for a space for the students themselves to engage and understand the different experiences that they had that brought them to where they were as instructors of this course, to brought them to where they were as people designing a course around decoloniality centered on cross-cultural communication. And modeling that way of storytelling allowed and opened up and activated us as students to be able to do the same throughout the course ourselves. And so each of us had the opportunity and platform to share our story or share a part of our story. And of course, the guest speakers also shared their story, talked a little bit about how, where they came from, what kind of journey that they took. And we were really able to develop the community that wasn't just the instructors and the students, but also all those folks who came in and shared that space with us. Here's just a list. I won't read through them all, but you can see that the number of people who came in and engaged in this community with us, it was vast. One of my favorite sessions was with El Cambalache, which is a really innovative group in Mexico that really focuses on developing non-capitalistic economies and advancing the positionality of women, especially Indigenous women in their communities. And they came in and they were able to engage with us in this course and tell their story. And they, you know, if we were just limited to talk and text, I think it would have been really challenging to kind of express kind of the vastness that comes along with the journey that they have taken in their initiative and the lived experiences that they've had in kind of developing the El Cambalache, which is kind of a network program that, yeah, there's a lot that goes along with it. So definitely look into that to get more information. Here's just some snapshots of one of the student narratives. One of my classmates talked about the standards of beauty, talked about, gave some of their experiences growing up and hearing different kind of narratives about what is expected and what is considered beauty in certain cultures and other cultures, and having a lot of, there's a challenge between living in different communities and having mixed messages, and so she was able to share this through photos, videos, as well as telling her story orally. And then one of the things as we progressed throughout the course is we kind of mapped where we were, our origin story, our journey, and we were able to kind of develop kind of a global snapshot of our community in this course. And so in terms of, why is this relevant to this topic of multimodal meaning making? And for me, it's, the concepts of decoloniality by Magnola and Walsh are really complex and could definitely, we could focus on those concepts from a very academic perspective, but because we were able to explore these concepts in a different way and really connect them with our own embodied knowledge and kind of explore the journeys of others, I think that it has helped us conceptualize it in a way where we've been able to kind of, it comes up frequently in my cohort, talking about these concepts and applying them, not just from academic sense, but from, an applied sense. And I think having the multimodal meaning making approach was really significant towards that.
Okay, so quickly, because I think we're like close, right? Like, is this the end? I don't even know when this is over. Yeah. So I don't want to take more time, but I just want to show that we're also doing a couple of, there's a great seed grant project, and then we have some dissertations that use multiple modalities. And so we can always talk about more podcasts, art shows, community level interventions, and we hope to do more of that. And we'll be doing more on this at the institution. We hope to invite people from anywhere because it will be online, and we want to create more opportunities for universities to engage in this type of scholarship. That's really the end. Thank you.
All right. As usual, we haven't left as much time for discussion as we would like. So Chris has kind of offered up his space as discussant, and we'll probably join into the conversation so that we can put it out to all of you and hear what you're thinking, what's coming up for you, or any questions you might have for any of the panelists. Erica.
This is very refreshing and good. Everybody's work was just exceptional, but ROSHANI, girl, I just want to say that like what you're doing is exemplary for me. I run around here begging people to work within their own communities. And it always seems like there are folks outside of communities of color coming in to fix communities of color or offer us a voice when we already have one. What you did was demonstrate that that's not necessary because you got it. And you got it in one of the most stunning and magnificent ways. I'm so very impressed with your work. I'm about to explode. I cannot even tell you how you have renewed. I was feeling some kind of way about community psychology. What are we doing? And your work is just such, you are the future in my eyes of what community psychology is. People from communities of color representing the groups that they're working with their peers and with their communities to advance their own communities without some savior coming in to do it for us. You are an exemplar. You are an example to those who might believe that they are a necessary savior. No, you ain't, because folks like you have got it. And that leaves plenty of room for other groups of people to go and talk to their groups that they hail from and fix the pathologies that go ignored consistently, because people like you are doing such stunning and amazing work. I thank you. Beautiful. But everybody's work was really cool. That was not to say that everybody was.
Hi, Modena. I forgot your name, but I just want to kind of echo what Erica was talking about. What really hit home for me was that you talked about having all these ideas of what you guys thought that the population might want, but then you allowed it to emerge. And it just kind of confirmed a lot of the work that I do in my community, because I always say, let's not plan this out. Let's see what they want. Let's let them tell us. And so many people are resistant and against it. And I began to question, is this the right way to do this? And thank you just for that confirmation, because it's working. And everybody's work was phenomenal. And I appreciate everything that you brought today. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to echo the same comments that have been made already. I think it was a really wonderful panel. And I'm also wondering about potential disruptions into SCRA. I know that we're broader than that here, but I'm just thinking a little bit about, like, there's the TCP podcast. They only post maybe 4 times a year. I guess I'm just wondering, we've heard about like so many wonderful podcasts today, whether it be classes at National Lewis or some of the Brisbane Live or the things that Natalie and your colleagues are working on. I guess I just wonder if there's space for, if not the TCP, podcast location, some kind of broader, I don't know, ICCP podcast location where some of these can be archived, so that those of us who aren't here today, like I wouldn't know that all of these things are going on, but if they could be like a few of them stored in some kind of centralized space, then that would maybe make it more accessible and help move things from the, what are we calling it now, majority world into the minority world. I don't know what language we're using these days. I'll ask Erica what language she's using and follow her.
I mean, I don't want to necessarily speak for Chris since it's the discussant, but I'll say maybe one piece and then you can talk about the ICCP website that will host a lot of this. I think Chris and Sam have worked really hard on that. So Dominique Thomas, who's going to be one of the co-organizers of SCRA next year and who runs the TCP podcast, has already tried to figure out where some kind of touch points between our 2 podcasts will be. Don't know exactly what that will look like yet, but absolutely my goal, one of my goals is always to disrupt SCRA. And so we will be launching our full podcast at the SCRA conference in Atlanta in June, with some intention of having some conversations around what that means for kind of getting outside of the SCRA North American bubble. But also then thinking about how this podcast continues grounded in a more global perspective and will not be housed at SCRA, but will be used to kind of push and challenge some of the narratives and kind of North American, Western, Eurocentric kind of perspectives in the discipline. Do you want to talk about the ICCP website, Sam?
So as a result of the online conference we held in Melbourne, we decided, because we'd captured all that content, we needed to develop an archive or a digital repository. So we are the current stewards, I guess, of the internationalcommunitypsychology.com, which is centered around really archiving what is this conference, what brings this conference together, what are the textures, colors, but also what are the projects emerging from. We're not seeking to be the kind of penultimate history of the conference, but it's got some really interesting information about the history of it, but also these projects that are emerging. And so we are hoping to use it also for some of those kind of central connecting points for some of these conference related projects. So, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to see if we can, it's just ICCP dot.
International Community Psychology.
Oh, it's the whole thing.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, wow. I was very wrong. Gina, you're also giving me an idea that maybe there are enough podcasts. We should start our own podcast network. So that's something to think about, because there are community psych podcasts. There's the Discovering Community Psychology one in the UK. There's an archive of my radio show. So we should figure out how to host it in a way that's kind of accessible. So thanks for bringing that up, Gina. Do we have any other questions or thoughts from the audience?
So I was so excited about the work. I didn't get a chance to acknowledge Erin and Tiffany, National Louis University. I just have to say that everything that you talked about, Dr. Jimenez, was absolutely true. The way that National Louis puts together education, content, and practice for students that, you know, are going through their program and giving them different ways, you know, to present dissertation, different ways to express who they are and allow their voice to be heard. It's so important. It was such an impactful experience for me. I made it through, thank goodness. But just, I had to acknowledge that.
Okay, while we're acknowledging, Tiffany was the co-chair for my dissertation, and she was really phenomenal in making sure that my work got to be what I wanted to be, and has been like a significant part of my coming of age as a community psychologist. So for as long as we're acknowledging, I'm just going to say that. But my question again for Rasha, I had your name up in the book the last time. Were there any Brimbank Live shows or ideas that were rejected? Like, were there any voices or any ideas for a show, or maybe even topics for a show within the show that didn't get a chance to go up?
Hello. Okay, it's on. So there was actually, I guess, a whole other part to the process, I guess, and the mechanisms of making the space that reflected the fact that these young people were obviously building their own shows, creating their own content. And because the setting of Brimbank Live sat attached to and within like local government and that particular community space, because these young people were kind of leading their own kind of content and creating their content, there was a little bit of resistance that came from the local kind of council, where they were kind of like, if these young people are going to speak about what they want to do, then we kind of can't be a part of it and support. So one of the things that I write about as well is, I guess, the hurdles and the fact that financial support really was just us applying for grants and us kind of finding our own funding. Also us kind of promoting the shows on our own, because the council didn't want to kind of support us doing it because of that. So in terms of the specific question you asked about, was there anything that was kind of rejected? No, but I guess because we were kind of doing what we wanted to do, there were consequences, I guess. And I guess it just really spoke to the fact that these great spaces can exist, but they still exist within systems that are quite restraining and yeah, just really require flexibility and adaptability in the process. But yeah.
I think we're out of time anyway, but thank you everybody for coming. I know that Tiffany and maybe Chris have a session again right now, I think in here. So if you have questions for folks, feel free to connect out, but thank you all for coming.
And that one might also relate to the disrupting a CRA question. Is that your USB? Oh, someone's USB? That one? Oh, that's fine. Okay.